refreshments, that, especially now because of the heavy lunch that we've just had. So we call that sanyama. So it's a shisanyama lunch, which is literally burnt meat, but of course it means braai, which is bride. That meal will sort you out. But I'm hoping that it does not deal with your insomnia now. May it withhold its abilities and its power until the evening. So if you feel like you are falling asleep, please stand up and stretch your legs. Because right now, and this in Africa, of the MTN Media Innovation Summit, this session is chaired by my learned colleague, Dr. Maud Blosse from the University of Johannesburg, and she also serves as a senior lecturer as well as the internationalization representative. Dr. Blosse, over to you. Oh, sorry, just before I hand over, forgive me. See, if you need to step out of the venue, I kindly ask that we use, you see by that side, we've got the cameraman. So normally, we would appreciate if you go behind the camera, right? Just for today. You know, maybe somewhere in broadcast, you like being in front of the camera. Just for today, go behind the camera. Use that door, the door that is exit that the gentleman is pointing to, all right? Otherwise, sit back, relax, and learn. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Zondo. Good afternoon, colleagues. Yo, we are tired, right? Because our stomachs are full. And because our stomachs are full, even our voices now are like, good afternoon. Good afternoon, colleagues. Yes, now we sound more like media people. Thank you so much. I'm not a public speaker. In fact, I dislike public speaking so much, right? So much so that when we have these things, I blame our HOD, who likes to just, he likes to get us out of our comfort zone, like in a good way, right? So welcome to this second session of the day, which is under the theme Media and Diplomacy in Africa, Trends, Opportunities, and Challenges. It's going to be very interesting. I promise you, it will be very interesting. And I'm going to be biased because, Doc, this one is made up of females, right? This one is made up of females, and if you know anything about females, we give life to things, right? We multiply things, right? And whatever a female touches turns to gold, right? And whenever a female speaks, you have no choice but to listen, right? So let us listen to our phenomenal panel that is here in the front this afternoon. Yes, they call it the graveyard shift, but let's hear what is going to happen. I'm just going to read a little bit of some lines from our speakers' bios. I'm not going to read all of them, just so that you know when I speak about phenomenal women, it's not me who's saying it, but it's the work that they've done that speaks for itself, right? Awesome. So we will start with Mam Sophie Mgwena. So her career was shaped by South Africa's transition to democracy as a student leader. Yes, student leader. As a student leader, she introduced voter education and democracy training programs in 1994, which was a crucial year here in this country. In 1994, she joined the Independent Electoral Commission as a monitor in troubled VAL communities. After the elections, she became a current affairs presenter at the SABC, anchoring shows like Macholo and Makumane, increasing listenership, right? So she increased the listenership for the broadcaster. She later became the first she later became the first black female parliamentary reporter and international news editor. That deserves a round of applause. Her work emphasizes the importance of integrity in sustaining democracy's hard-won gains. Let's give her a round of applause. Cam. And then next to her, we have Amarachi Ubani. So Amarachi, your surname Ubani, in isiZulu, Ubani means, who are you? Like who? Like who are you, right? So I'm going to tell you guys who she is. So she is a She's a multiple award-winning broadcast journalist and one of Africa's most influential voices in international affairs reporting. Ranked 8th most of influential female journalists in Africa by Women in Journalism Africa in 2024, she serves as international news content and anchors flagship programs including Diplomatic Channel and The World Today. With nearly 2 decades of experience, you look very young though. With nearly 2 decades of experience in news anchoring, field reporting, and program production, Amarachi has led coverage of high-profile global events from the Rwanda presidential election and the Saudi Africa summit to the US presidential elections and African Union summit. More is on your programs. Welcome, Amarachi. And then next to Amarachi, we have Dr. Kate Skinner. She has been a media freedom activist in South Africa since 1994, which I find very interesting. She chaired the board of the Freedom of Expression Institute and was a board member for a decade. In 2008, she founded the civil society campaign and lobby group, Save Our SABC, to support our public broadcaster. For 16 years, the organization has played a key legal policy and advocacy role in holding the SABC to account in terms of its public service mandate. In 2012, she turned her focus to academia. Welcome to academia, and completed a PhD degree in 2017 focusing on public service broadcasting, media diversity, and South Africa's stop-start migration to digital terrestrial television. In February 2018, she was appointed Executive Director of the South African National Editors Forum. In July 2021, she took over as Executive Director of the Community Media Online and Print Organization, based in Johannesburg, Africa's reporting. We are yet to know. As co-author of Who Will Rule SA, she has contributed meaningfully to public debate on South Africa's political future. Her highly anticipated new... Actually, I'd prepared some notes, but I think I would like for us to see the opening words. Over to you, my distinguished, fabulous guests.
1, 2, okay. Thank you so much. As she has pointed out, thanks, Doc. My name is Sophie Mugwena. I used to work for the South African Broadcasting Corporation, that is the SABC. I retired in July, end of July, and therefore I am not international news editor anymore at the SABC, but I am still quite active in terms of imparting knowledge and also communicating, because thanks to technology and digital platform, you can continue to be a journalist as long as your mind is still sound and you are able to report. When I was here earlier on, somebody said to me on Twitter, Sophie, the case of the former Zambian president is being heard in court in Pretoria. Please, man, we don't know what's happening. Can you update us? And I was like, I'm here and there's no way I can do that. I'm not watching, I'm not in court. That speaks to, much as people are aware that I've retired, they still believe that I must be active. And therefore, thanks for the invitation, University of Johannesburg and your partner, and also MTN, the sponsor, making it possible for us to interact on the continent. Now, what is public diplomacy? Public diplomacy is communicating information to the outside, when I'm in South Africa, to the outside world. World would include the region, the continent, different other regions. And that can be done through media in a very effective way. And therefore, it is important for countries and governments and business to really appreciate the role of the media, international media in particular, because if you are an international brand or you are a government, you communicate with the outside world, and therefore it's easy to disseminate information by using media, broadcasting, and thanks to advent of technology, you can now do it on digital platform. Digital platform is part of international media. Now, the media and the diplomatic section or foreign affairs section or the country itself, you have to use media to communicate. On the other hand, the media has to be careful of not being just a conveyor of what government is saying, what business is saying, including the NGOs, because all these different sectors, they have vested interest in terms of communicating their own narrative. Doesn't mean NGOs, activists are neutral. They are communicating their own narrative. They want something, you know, and they want particular information to be communicated in a way that suits them. That's what we often call narrative. Now, for government to understand the influence of media in terms of diplomacy, I'm going to give you a short example. You know, as a former teacher, you always demonstrate. The South African government and the Rwandan government, there's tension between the two countries. It emanated from some Rwandese who came to the country seeking refuge because of the tensions post the genocide. Now, the policy and the international relations department and the South African constitution do allow refugees, people who have been persecuted in their respective countries and all of that. So you see many people coming to South Africa. And you know, at times, those people will behave or misbehave, or there will be challenges. And that tension has really become problematic. And with the current conflict in the eastern part of the DRC, where SADC, because you know that the DRC is also a member of the SADC region and the East Africa community. South Africa, being a country with strong force, was roped in with other countries to be part of the SADC force that was going to help the DRC in the eastern part. Now you have also other countries who have vested interest in that. And therefore that kind of caused even more tension between the two. Now for many years as a journalist, international or international editor, I've always wanted to do or to interview Paul Kagame. If you can ask journalists on the continent how many have been able to secure interview with Paul Kagame, very few. So finally, when they were commemorating the 30th Rwandan genocide, I got a call from the embassy to say they would want to invite me to the 30th commemoration of the genocide because it coincides with South Africa's democracy. I said, I will go on condition I'll be able to do an interview with President Paul Kagame because there are questions that I want to ask President Kagame as it relates to the relationship between South Africa and Rwanda. That's a typical example of media diplomacy. And those questions, I intended to ask him hard questions, but I did, and he gave me 2 hours. That's where I practiced media diplomacy. Hard questions, but very calm and in a diplomatic way. And he was able to answer all the questions that people are asking about Paul Kagame. If you check that interview on YouTube, you'll see. So that interview, when it was flighted, because it was recorded, I mean, you know, Kagame, you are scared, but 2 hours I was able to speak to him. And then when it was flighted on SABC, the President of the Republic and his team watched the interview because he was going to attend the commemorations, and the intention was to speak to Kagame to try and find one another. So that interview, after the meeting with Kagame, then we got the President of South Africa to share his views about the meeting with Kagame. And the first thing he told us was that thanks to the interview I did with Paul Kagame, because he was able to understand what's the issue, because it didn't start during his tenure. Because sometimes these guys or women, you inherit carcass, you know, your predecessor messed up, and then people start asking you questions. You don't even know how this thing started, but you have to deal with it. So Ramaphosa inherited this problem. Now he didn't have real facts and understand that was agreed some of the stuffs that we can resolve now as two nations for the sake of our people, not for them as politicians. Because after the genocide, it was the South African government that allowed young Rwandese to come to South Africa to study. So as you see Rwanda today, it's public service. Majority of those people who are now running Rwanda, good as it is #2 in terms of the best run country, thanks to South Africa. And South Africa was able to negotiate with the universities here not to charge them a lot of money, because this was a country that's recovering from a genocide, you see. So I'm saying that interview, my intention was not for the South African government to use my interview. I was asking him the questions that are being asked by both the Rwandese and the South Africans, including the people in the Great Lakes region, because of the conflict between M23 and the government of Rwanda. So even M23 watched the interview and they started reaching out to me. And that helped, because when the South African soldiers were trapped in the eastern part of the DRC, some relatives got in touch with me to say, our children, they don't have water, they don't have food. How, Miss Sophie, what can you do? Can't you speak to the president? I remember speaking to the president's spokesperson during the opening of parliament to say, hey, I've received so many messages. I did show him WhatsApp. But there was nothing that they can do because there was hostility. But then I called the M23 to say, guys, but what are you doing to our sisters and our brothers? Why are you not giving them water at least? You know, they gave them water and food. But I'm a journalist, you know. So you see, there's a way you can play a role, because you're helping people who are in danger by asking questions. So it's quite important. And today, everybody's surprised why the M23 will always, you know, talk to me, and I'm able to ask them hard questions. I'm informed about what's happening. It's because they realize that here is a South African who is asking right questions that can develop and unite our continent. And that's why the media and public diplomacy is quite important. And for you to be able to do this sometimes, there must be trust between media and government. Not friends, because you still have to ask them hard questions. But if you ask them questions off the record to say, but tell us the truth, how many soldiers have died? They must confirm that soldiers have died, but we can't go public because we still have to inform the families. You see, so there's that kind of a thing, but they don't stop you from reporting. Secondly, because we have people from Nigeria and MTN, you know that there's this tension where MTN is operating on the continent because of the regulatory framework. It's not only in Nigeria. They do experience problems in other countries as well. So I have done those kind of stories, and I would get an ambassador saying, hey, thank you, Sophie, for doing that story. You know, we are going to have a meeting with the communications department of Uganda or Rwanda to talk about how South African companies can operate with ease without all these challenges that they are facing. The same with other companies from other countries in South Africa. They do find challenges with regulatory framework. So that is what I call public diplomacy. We recently saw South Africa being pressurized by the United States of America to change its policies. And it's bullying. It's nothing else but bullying. Now, what Tshidi, my dear, there's a South African journalist who traveled to Washington, and let me correct, in South Africa, SABC, it's not a state broadcaster. It is a public broadcaster. It belongs to the people of South Africa, irrespective of their color, creed, religion, or political inclination. And therefore, when we travel with the president, we don't get funded by government. It is SABC money. That is why it's important for SABC to have money. And earlier on, the speaker said the South African media travel with the president. It's important. No, 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 no. The presidency doesn't offer us a lift or food or accommodation. Media houses, when they travel, they pay. Now, the journalists that went to Washington, they had paid for themselves. They wanted to do a story because it was in the South African public interest, but also the continent, because that tension, it's not helping the two nations. So, Tshidi, my dear, had reported about the meeting between the South African delegation and the US delegation led by President Trump. We saw that story. It was a big international story. But because there was disinformation and misinformation that was communicated to the US administration in terms of what's happening in South Africa, the journalists, yes, they were reporting that this is what America is saying about South Africa and this is how South Africa responded. But when you get challenged, when a journalist wants to continue with such misinformation, Tshidi had to tell the truth. She wasn't defending South African government. She was telling the truth and saying, no, but this is wrong. This is not how things are in the country. And therefore, that's where public diplomacy, again, plays itself indirectly. Telling the truth, but it translates into public diplomacy. So it is important for countries to have a relationship with media so that you can be able to communicate your policies, you can be able to communicate with the outside world. And I think when I wrap up, I know many people, you know the SABC. Our colleague from Zambia was talking about, in the SADC region, they watch SABC because we are very balanced. We try to reflect the continent, tell the African story from an African perspective, good or bad. And therefore, I think the role of the media is very important as it relates to international relations and foreign affairs. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ma'am Sophie. You have said a mouthful, which is great because it gives us a lot of things to think about. And I'm sure a lot of us have questions that we will ask during the Q&A session, so thank you so much. One of the key things that I am taking away from your opening is that as journalists or as media practitioners, let me call us that, right? As media practitioners, it sounds broader and it sounds more fancier, right? If you say media practitioners, fine. As media practitioners, we have a huge responsibility, right? And I feel like, and I can say this, and confidently so, because I have worked in the industry. So storytelling is something that is very critical. However, it is a huge challenge if you don't know your own story. You won't be able to tell your country's story. You won't be able to tell the next person's story, right? It is very important that we know what our story is. And I think that is one of the things that we still struggle with even today. What is my story? What is your story? Before you even get into being a diplomatic media practitioner and telling a South African or a Nigerian story, what is your story? And how does your story contribute to your country's story? Do we ever think about those things? So it's just something to think about, and we'll get more into the questions later on. So the next one with the opening, when my mic is like this, time, right? So just look at me every now and again, and just notice my mic, right? So when it comes up, then it just means that it's time to just wrap up a little bit. Yeah, so our next person is Amarachi Obane, so may we please have opening from you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And I will greet you in Nigerian languages. The three major Nigerian languages. We have Ekaro, for those who are Yoruba amongst us. People like Yemi, and you can identify him by the cap he's wearing. You know that he's from the southwestern part of the country. Then for the Igbos, is Ndewo, people like Precious, Amaka, Georgina, and then there's Sanu for those from the north who are, Zainab is actually Hausa. I'm sorry, you're Yoruba, but you lived in the north, people like her. And I could also add Yaya. Yayade, meaning how is life, how is everything. So I bring you greetings from Nigeria, one of the best countries in the world. Not just in Africa. You know why? Because Nigerians are the most versatile people I know. We are the most flexible, the most adaptable. There's something we say that Nigerians like to show themselves. When they're out there, they like to show themselves. Whether it is in the dressing. As I sat here, Dr. Kate told me, lovely color. And I was like, yes, but that's a Nigerian thing. We like to we like to reflect, how we feel. We like to reflect what we think. We always like to share our opinion on things. And it gives me great pleasure to be here in University of Johannesburg. My first time here, by the way, in the University of Johannesburg, But I've been to South Africa a number of times. And unfortunately, I've not been able to visit here or visit some of the places that we visited yesterday. I have passed by Soweto, but never passed through Soweto. And I got the opportunity to do that yesterday. I also got the opportunity to visit the Apartheid Museum, something I've never done before. And I'm impressed at the way you have documented and preserved your history. Because that is important. They say, if you don't go into your history, you'll make the same mistakes in the future. And it is good that you have documented, you have acknowledged, you have spoken about it, you've cried, you've talked about it. There's a Truth and Reconciliation Commission that has looked into all of the issues from the apartheid era. And we have come to this conclusion that South Africa is a rainbow nation. It has all peoples. It is also very welcoming because we also have a large percentage of Nigerians here in South Africa doing great. We know that you've tried our food. You can't help it. It's the best in the world. We have our jollof rice that is unequivocally the best. We have our egusi soups. We have our paps are different. The South African pap is more solid than ours, but it's still, you can't help but notice us. You can't help but be friends with us. Yeah. So where does media and diplomacy come in? I once heard a former Minister of Foreign Affairs say that diplomacy is not experienced on the pages of newspaper. Meaning that there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes that we don't see. And I believe that what we see in the media, what is portrayed in the media, is just a fraction of what happens behind the scenes. Take, for instance, let's say, a spat between Nigeria and South Africa. And unfortunately, we will have to refer to what we call the xenophobic attacks, even though I'm still trying to understand this for years. Every once in a while, the news comes up. You know, you find the videos, you find stories of Nigerians who are maltreated, dehumanized here in South Africa and things like that. And all of that is happening where? In the media. And unfortunately, because of new media now, we're even more aware of what is going on. But where does media diplomacy come in, or the media and diplomacy come in? We try to douse fires. That's what I've been trying to do for the better part of my career. I remember that the first time, you know, when I joined channels in 2007, and one of the first stories that I've had to cover through our former correspondent who was here in South Africa, Betty Dibia, was, you know, one of these attacks. And she used to live here. She used to say, you know, when you come to South Africa, yes, the people are friendly, people are nice, but you also need to be careful. I know that I had a cousin who also stayed here as well, and it was like, you have to be careful and so on. And I realized, you know, having lived, you know, a long life, I would say, and then having been to several other cities, in every large city, you do have the same problems. You have the same problems. If you come to Lagos, Nigeria, you probably hear the same narrative. Be careful where you go. Don't go to certain places. Oh, hold your money tight. Oh, hold your phone tight and all that. If you get to a place and you act as a tourist, the people will show you that you are truly a tourist. They will show you that you're truly a tourist. They will leave you with a few souvenirs. Sorry, they will take off a few souvenirs from you. Maybe your phone, maybe your money, or possibly your peace. Because, I mean, how do you stay in a place where you have no peace? So, the media helps to douse some of these fires. The media also helps relate with governments. And governments find it, some governments find it soothing having to talk to the media. I mean, she just gave an example of her interview with President Paul Kagame. I have never had an interview with President Paul Kagame. The closest I've gotten to him is being at his campaign. That is the closest I've gotten to President Paul Kagame. And I remember that I and some other journalists who were there also asked for, okay, would he just grant us a press conference, at least? And they said, trust me, the president will not talk to you. These were his media aides and everybody else, and they said, the president will not talk to you. He already had an interview the other week with the BBC, and that is the interview we kept referring to. And we had more questions from that, and it's always been like, okay, we need to hear from him. But, you know, I'm talking about another government, where our own government, unfortunately, sometimes does not even talk to us. Our Nigerian government, that's what I'm talking about. When they go on their foreign trips and they go on their diplomatic missions and foreign trips and all of that, most times, you know, you don't get no-name names. We used to have a president who used to, it was every time he was outside of the country that we used to hear about what was going on in Nigeria and what his policies were regarding what was going on in Nigeria. And I once had an opportunity to speak to that president, but, well, fate had it that at the time that I would have spoken to him, I had to be called out of the room, and when he walked in, I couldn't enter anymore, so I couldn't. I'm sorry, I would have gotten you that exclusive, but I couldn't. So, our own leaders do not talk to us, and I think that's where the problem begins, where presidents and leaders do not see the press or the media as the fourth estate, the ones to whom they owe the responsibility to tell things to explain public policy, to explain why we're having problems with such and such country, to explain what they have done, and to even listen to suggestions. Because, I mean, you have a Dr. Sophie here, okay, well, maybe it's coming to you, possibly. Yeah. It's coming to you, yeah. Dr. Sophie, I remember I once called somebody that a person who actually became a doctor. And you also have Dr. Kate, you know, and you also have, I'll refer to all of us as doctors, okay? I hope that's fine. Yeah, so we're all doctors. And, you know, we've all had experiences, we've all had stories to tell, we've all had, you know, we have things that we can, at least some pieces of advice we can give to the government. If any one of us was picked as an ambassador, I'm sure we would do very well. If she was made ambassador of South Africa, possibly to Rwanda, I'm sure that the problems between South Africa and Rwanda would be diminished, because here she is, very knowledgeable, has even met with President Paul Kagame. He'll be better disposed towards her. if she had also met, with the president of another country, or she was made ambassador to another country, she would also do well. If I was made Nigerian ambassador to, what country do I want to go to?
Fiji.
All right, I'll leave that so that, some people will not quote me. So if I was made ambassador to another country, I would think that, yes, I would have enough information to give, the president of my own country. I would know the things to do. Unfortunately, right now, Nigeria does not have serving ambassadors in our foreign missions. Because when this new administration came in, he retired all of the ambassadors. So what we have are chargés d'affaires, we have heads of missions, we have deputy heads of missions heading the whole place, and we know people don't understand the impact or the import of what this is. A president is going to a country, there is no leader of his own delegation on ground to welcome him. He has to come with the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Minister of State for Foreign Affairs, who would arrive maybe a day or two before him and would appear at the airports. They would smile in front of the cameras, but who does the real work? It is the ambassadors who do the real work behind the scenes. They're the ones that lay the framework. They're the ones that continue with the conversations behind the scenes. They're the ones that make the policies. They're the ones that go back to the governments and say, okay, so this is how far we have come. This agreement was signed with South Africa this December last year. And one of the outcomes of that meeting was the 5-year visa agreement between South Africa and Nigeria. The waiver, but do you know what? That was already on the ground. It wasn't a new policy. Unfortunately, the president treated it like a new policy. And there was no ambassador, no member of the diplomatic corps to tell him, look, we have done this before. Can we try something new? The establishment of the Nigeria-South Africa Binational Commission only became, stronger when with President Tinubu coming last year in December. But what has happened from then on till now? What is our relationship like? I think I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Marachi. One word I'm taking away from your intro is ambassadorship. And with the last statement that you made about the president thinking that the agreement was new, whereas it wasn't new, in my head, because we have media practitioners here, we are sort of failing at our job as the media. The information is there, the information is vast, right? But is it, in my head, there's a difference between information and knowledge, right? So there's a lot of information, but knowledge is not much, right? And us as media practitioners, we are not converting that information into relevant knowledge for not just the presidents, but even citizens themselves. And now I think another major challenge that we have, yes, one of the trends is the fact that we have youth now that are actively participating in the sharing of information. So we're not only just, as a country or as countries and as the world, we're not only just relying on the media to tell us or to give us the information, but even if you don't do it as the media, people are going to do it themselves, right? And with the rise of the digitization of and social media and all of those things, we have a major, citizens are telling, or they're being diplomatic, or there's lack thereof, actually. And we can see this in things that are trending on social media, right? And with the example of the South Africa-US story, I remember one of the pushbacks from the people, which was trending on social media, especially TikTok, was there were videos of white people that were showing that, listen, we are here, we are live. We are dancing in South Africa, right? There's a lot. There's xenophobic attacks as well. There's a lot of misinformation, disinformation, but then again, we are throwing those words out there. And my question is, what are we as media practitioners doing about that or those challenges, right? So thank you so much, Amarachi. So now next we have Dr. Kate Skinner.
Hello, everybody. Oh, this is wonderful. I was not sure if this was going to work. So after those fabulous inputs, wow, thank you. So I'm going to go and look at things from a slightly different perspective. So not from that kind of high-level diplomacy, international media, but from the side of community journalists. As I was introduced, I'm the executive director of the Association of Independent Publishers. And just so that people understand what that is, it's an organization that organizes small, tiny little publications all over the country, independent publications that, so it's magazines, it's newspapers, it's newsletters, it's online platforms. And one of the things that we're incredibly proud of is the fact that it is in all the languages, and it's Afrikaans, of covering those languages. And just when we're talking about misinformation, disinformation, I mean, it's so important that people can actually discuss issues in their own languages. And so that's something that we are incredibly proud about, is having publications that cover all of that. So then the issue here is, so what in particular does community media do that could potentially build the country and build diplomacy? And I know that when I was having the discussion with everybody about being on this panel, I was like, wow, when I think about community media, I don't necessarily initially think of community media playing that diplomatic role. And then when I thought about it a little bit more, I was like, well, actually, it absolutely does. Of course it does, if you just think a little more deeply. So let us just think a little bit more about what community media does. And I think what I've been finding so interesting about being in this sector is that the role of community media is to build community. So it's about finding common ground, celebrating and strengthening community, bringing people together while still holding people to account. So it's about doing both. And I'm kind of reflecting on my fellow speakers that have made those kind of points around, you know, you need to be able to build trust. And how do you do that if you go in guns blazing, accusatory, basically, you know, not giving the person or the other group like the space to speak. And so I think there's something really powerful about community media building the media blocks from the bottom up. So there's just one thing which I think is interesting in terms of definitions around community media. And people now are Richard, I don't think media sector as a whole inputs, I don't think media sector as a whole inputs in terms of the G20. It's very, very important that we as a media sector put forward our views. And I just want to say that some of the lessons that came out of those, that was, I mean, a lot of lessons came out, but one of the most important was about collaboration. Collaboration must be built from the bottom up. And that is, again, going back to, so if we're talking about collaboration, let's start from the bottom up in terms of community media. And then just one last thing that I want to talk about is just some of the just a little bit more about cohesion journalism and building that kind of strong media journalistic organizations that bridge divisiveness and create frameworks for consensus. Building trust across the chasms of divisiveness is hard. That's called respect. You know, so when people say, oh, you're doing the soft option, this is the hard option. And he talks about not being a fan of partisan journalism, saying, you know, I would rather that we follow the principle of we inform, you decide, which is going back to the really first principle. And I'd love people to agree and also and then he talks about this wonderful, which I just had such a resonance with me, was trust must be constantly earned and re-earned. You can't say, you know what, now we trust Kate. And then tomorrow I do something which is not okay, and I break trust, and I go build the community. It's a journey every day, constantly earned and re-earned. So yeah. Closing thought then, in this era of global instability, community media is not peripheral, it's central. It holds the promise of building trust, nurturing democracy, and ensuring Africa's voices are heard on the global stage.
Thank you, Kate. I love how you closed just as my mic was going up. Languages. And that is very important, right? So it's one of the things that we tend to, especially when it comes to our local, when I say our, as in South Africans and Nigerians, actually all Africans, right? When I say our languages, that is more dominant, right? Because we are the ones who've made it, or in languages that people really understand. Those stories, I'd like to believe they really do resonate with people, and that is when we not only just inform the public, but we also educate the public so that they can make better informed decisions about whatever it is that we're communicating to them. So thank you so much, Kate, for that. And then we saved the best for last, all of them are our best guys. So we have Juanita.
As a guiding light for many of our careers. Mam Sophie's career is as old as I am, but I had the opportunity for the last 15 years to report alongside her. And I think about a moment where we shared, the two of us, in the International Court of Justice in The Hague. So we were among 3 journalists that were South African journalists that were at The Hague when South Africa took the decision to take Israel to the International Court of Justice. And going on that trip, I've been on independently as well, where we traveled for 4 years. When I was at the Sunday Times, I traveled with the president, covering international engagements, whether it was UAE, Saudi, Nigeria 2 times, and I want to reflect on Nigeria in a little bit. But that moment at the International Court of Justice, where I looked at Mam Sophie and I realized that we had 2 roles that day. We had roles as disseminators of information, but as ambassadors of our country. Right, and it was such an interesting point, because at the time it was still regarded highly unpopular. Even in South Africa, it was regarded as this really terrible thing that South Africa was seeking to do. Why are we caring about, among our colleagues, right? Not understanding the obligation that South Africa had to the international law, that as long as you ratified it, we had this injunction to go and take this case forward. So what we had to do was that we had to communicate a court case, but we also had to be representatives of South Africa. And for me, it kind of settled in a way that I don't think prior to my 15 years in this career, had I ever had that moment to say, well, this is really not about only the story, but this is about advocating South Africa's decision. Now, that tested partisanship to say, no, we need to be as neutral observers, and that we cannot side with the South African government. We must be neutral in reporting a case. But how do you, at some point, media coexists in a world, number one, and in international framework, whereas the same constitution empowers me to do my work, right, as a South African journalist. It obligates me to respect international law, right? And so it was a quite an interesting moment to say, well, I have to report on this thing, and I am proud to be a South African. Now, it takes me to the second point, which is, can I be the player and the referee, right? As I'm advocating South Africa's position, and I'm reporting on it at the same time. And there's numerous cases of where this is. I'm just using the Palestine context, for example, is to say, Ta-Nehisi Coates, he is an American writer who went to Palestine, and he wrote about, and he has written extensively on the Black experience, the Black American experience. And he says, can you leave who you are at a door? Right? And so can I leave my South Africanness at the door? Can I leave my Africanness at the door? No, I can't. And so when I am going to Germany to observe the German coalition politics, as I do research on bringing that research home, I have a responsibility to take that and to talk about the fragile relationships, or the paternalistic relationship between Europe and Africa. It's my responsibility to do it. As much as I'm a gatherer of information, I'm a disseminator and I'm a teacher as well. When I'm sitting in Iowa and I am trying to understand the media landscape in an interesting time in that democracy, I have to sit forward and say, well, actually, the way the US has handled or has tried to enforce itself on African media is wrong, right? And so you end up playing an ambassadorial role whether you like it or not, right? And so the question then comes to that cohesion element to say, are we then singing the tune of our governments? And the answer must always be no. We are singing the tune of the people of South Africa because we are South Africans and Africans, right? And so that takes me to a second interesting role that I faced this year. So in the last year, I have transitioned out of being a full-time editor, and I've been working in three spheres. One is advocating for new media and trying really hard to say, if we all have the same problems of shrinking audiences, where are our audiences going to? And why is there, I've been doing this job for 15 years, but the people around me still don't understand the things I report on. These are my friends and my family. What are we doing wrong? So I transitioned into focusing on new media, using social first storytelling in a platform called the Debrief Network, and advocating for other media houses to do the same to change the landscape. The second part that I was doing was to work with international media. So when you're working with international media, it's interesting to see how they have a lens on South Africa. And then the third thing is focusing a lot of my time on a topic called transitional justice, right? And that's what I did for the last year. So it took me to many, many countries in the world in the last 12 months, and I ended up being in Syria. So it was 2-3 months after the war has ended, and I'm meeting with ministers of the new executive of the transitional government, and they are dealing with basically the end of a war, who must be held responsible for it, how do they build a country. And I found myself at this very interesting place where members of a transitional government, politicians of Syria, are asking me, how did South Africa do it? Right? And then I thought to myself, this is something that I have focused maybe a decade on, about apartheid crimes, about the TRC, about all of these things. And here I was advocating to another government and other people holistically, when you go to the Sednaya prison, having had the experience of going to Robben Island, to say, how do you just forgive and forget? What are the lessons that we learn in terms of forgiving and forgetting? Right. Transition, just move a little. I'm painting, moving a little bit backwards. We are in Nigeria. It's 2018. There is misinformation that gets sparked. An old picture from xenophobic violence resurfaces, and it is framed as if South Africans are killing Nigerians. Did a South African kill a Nigerian? Yes, that was many years before. Does it happen? Yes, it does. But at that time, it was framed as if, and we had to take a step back. We have a new president. President Ramaphosa gets elected. He's on this vision to kind of galvanize support from African countries. We're on this tour with him, and you met with this immense amount of hostility. And so you then see this your role as to hold the South African government accountable, which I did on numerous occasions, and we all did, in covering the failures of the state in xenophobic violence, but at the same time to come to the defense of the state now that says, well, no, this is not South African policy. It's been framed as South African policy that we kill our other African, but it's not the case. Similarly, we had to contend with disinformation, misinformation back home that says Nigerians are drug lords and etc., right? And so what became a diplomatic spat between the Minister of International Relations here and there, and then later on a very hostile working visit by South Africa's president to Nigeria, we had to then play this role further, both in Nigeria and in South Africa. And so the responsibility that comes with that. So I think I'm going to run through five lessons that I've learned. One, the importance of explainer journalism. So if we have to take our role in terms of public diplomacy, we have to make sure that every time we report on a development, a diplomatic development, we locate it in context, right? One. Two, to understand exactly what Mum Sophie says, that our role as in terms of accountability, and it also has an information role. We serve as informers to the public, but also as a source of information to newsmakers. So that responsibility is double, right? 3, we have to understand that if we don't tell our story correctly, others won't do the same. So if we don't have a proper understanding about what's happening between Zambia and why there's a corpse that is still not buried of a former head of state, we cannot expect the CNNs and the BBCs of the world to do our job better. Right. 4, to understand that praise singing and patriotism is not the same thing. So when we talk about a patriotic media environment or imperative, or an Africanist imperative, we are not talking singing the tune of the African Union and Kumbaya, Africa's rising, right? Because that does ourselves a disservice and does our audience a disservice. And then the 5th thing is to go to audiences where they are. We cannot be having these conversations about diplomacy, understanding what's happening in Rwanda and in Goma in elite circles when it affects ordinary people, right? So essentially what Mum Sophie does about those soldiers that have killed there is actually helping the family understand what happened. Simple as that. And so understanding that we are not speaking to the power brokers, we are speaking to the public. And so we have an interpretation imperative that we cannot forget. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Juanita. Did I lie about our panelists? I didn't, right? I personally am looking forward to the questions that you guys will pose to them. So in conclusion, just to wrap up before we get into our Q&A, before the conclusion, Juanita, you said a lot. And you left us with a lot. Actually, let me speak for myself. You left me with a lot to think about. And especially about personal or individual responsibility. And I'm saying this not just to us as media practitioners, but I think even to ordinary citizens. And for the mere fact that a lot of us have social media platforms. And the question is, what content are we putting out there? Are we even aware of the content that we're putting out there? What's the purpose of the content that we're putting out there, right? What's the intention behind that content? I don't think these are things that we think about, right? And again, it boils down to the individual role and responsibility when it comes to us being diplomatic, because diplomacy for me is not something that is abstract. Again, it boils down to the individual role and responsibility when it comes to us being diplomatic, because diplomacy for me is not something that is abstract, and it's not some citizens within Africa. Guys, Africa is beautiful. It is amazing. We've traveled the world, but there's no place like Africa. Yes, we have our challenges, but which country doesn't, right? But let me stop there before I get into personal stuff. So yeah, and then just to, yeah. Okay, so we'll get into the Q&A. Yeah, and then we'll probably close at the end, just to accommodate you. In 10 minutes, we leave it out to the rest of our panelists.
Dukui, Arise News, Abuja. I'm a broadcast journalist. You've done so much. I'm just curious about your book, Why Am I Like This? Is it a summary about the book? I don't know if I'll be here when it's launched, so please. Go ahead.
Clear that I took a break that was not a break, but what the gift that I had of the last 12 months is to say, just step away from being in the hamster wheel of the news and developments and this story and that story, and just give yourself a little bit of perspective. And I've come back so refreshed. and just to keep it on theme, that yes, you could say, oh, you went, you wrote a book and came back, but actually, you could say, oh, you went, you wrote a book and came back, but actually, what it did for me is that it kind of did it. But what I did was is that it kind of did it. But what I did was we told it in a social way, which is a girl in a minute holding a map and showing why this is wrong, why that's wrong, and we got experts in a minute holding a map and showing why this is wrong, why that's wrong, and we got experts who now understand that I don't need to do 8 minutes of an interview with you because you're just going to tell the most important thing, right? So now experts, academics are now saying, okay, please break this down for us. And we're able to do that tidbit. But I'm going on a tangent to say that fuel your creativity because it comes back and helps your journalism in ways that you don't even expect.
There's also at the back. There's also at the back.
Thank you so much, Juanita. I think you partly answered my second question in this your recent comment. But my first question, experienced journalists in the room, and one of the challenges many of us had was translating what we know about our specific fields into explainer journalism like you have with the brief. So I would really want to know two things. One, how do you deal with the burnout from doing your regular job so you could have extra time to creatively tell stories on your personal channels? Then some of us struggle, not me, but some other people struggle with employment policies. So maybe you have bosses that believe that doing this is doing things that are maybe against your organizational interest or something. So I don't know if you have the same challenge, but we'll be willing to glean from your knowledge as to how you dealt with it. Then my second question is, what are the key learnings that you've learned from the process that you might want to share with us that could help us along the way? Because I know this is a new feed for many of us, but we really want to get insights from what you have learned so that we won't go through the same mistakes.
So I'll be very quick. On your first question, it's enormous, right? The amount of things that we have to do, and you pulled in this direction and that direction and that direction, and now you have to. I'm going from newsroom to newsroom, literally advocating for new media, and journalists are responding to say we have too much going on. How do you expect us to still do this? But I'll tell you this: the power of journalism lies in one thing: is in your audiences. If people are not reaching, if your journalism is not reaching people, unfortunately, it's as good as not doing it. And so we cannot disinvest to be like, we can just tell a club of elite people who read our fantastic 2,000-word pieces. If our audiences are not consuming media in that way, you have to transition to that point, right? So the idea is not to say, oh, we must all become TikTok stars. It's not what I advocate for. What I'm saying is give people information in the way that they want information to receive information. The second point is around the burnout, because how do you then, it's about being intentional about what you want to do. So that's why I talk about two streams as a journalist. It's your job and it's your career. Your job is what your job wants. Your job is what Mam Sophie would go to G20 to cover G20. Her career is what brings her here. Understand? Where you see yourself beyond just meeting a deadline, that you are part of something, you're forging something bigger than yourself, and that's where your career lies in. And so the idea for me is that I could have just written 800 words and walked away, but the idea of looking at new platforms, looking at new ways of storytelling, I had to learn how to edit on social. And now I teach journalists how to edit. When I'm not a video journalist, I've never had a video experience. There's understanding that we are one medium. I'm a broadcast journalist. I'm a print journalist. That doesn't exist in 2025. So essentially, I'm a journalist, and that's what distinguishes me from the people that from the people who put stuff on social media. I have legitimacy. I have guidelines. I know. And so the medium is the medium that will change. Today it's in this format. Tomorrow who knows? We'll be writing stuff that's like comes from the sky down. I don't know what it looks like. But technology, the medium will change. That's not our business. Our business is to adapt. But journalism remains the same. And so when you have that purpose, you understand why you're doing things. So in the understanding of like, why would you put stuff on your personal social media? It's about putting stuff on social media. It is about fulfilling a bigger objective. And so for some of us, we have the latitude. If you're freelance, you can do that. Or the second thing is, and what's better for me and you, is to get buy-in from your employer by not telling, by showing. To say, this is how you can build bigger audiences if you adapt your storytelling. So try to get that buy-in from your media houses, because at the end of the day, this is not about joining a pool of noise on social media, but it really is about, it's about maximizing opportunity to fulfill our obligation, which is informing the public, right? What was the second? Yeah. So what I'm saying is that try to work around it, and I'm the worst person to ask for this advice, because I say it's better to ask for forgiveness than to ask for permission. but so in that way, but just to say that this experience that I've had, when I went to media houses last year this time, and I said to them, listen here guys, there's something called generative AI that's going to strip your hard work and your expensive journalism and basically render your URL defunct, let alone your newspaper, right? I don't need to go to www.news24 or Arise or whatever it may be. If I just say, for example, G20 Ramaphosa, and ChatGPT can throw me the information that I have. Now that's a bigger conversation that we had at the M20, but what I'm saying to you is that we can sit and render ourselves irrelevant, or we can adapt, because as Mam Sophie, as the colleagues here have said, that essentially we have a much bigger role to play, that we are actually being the platform of relationships between two countries going sour or not. That the hostility between South Africa and Rwanda was in some way stymied by an interview. And it's not overstating it. It's really not overstating it. Similarly, with Nigeria and South Africa, that it could have been, it's two economic powerhouses at each other's throats, where journalists said, hold on, let's cut through the noise. So if you understand your responsibility, the case for adaptation is an easy one. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Juanita. Yes,
Thank
you may
you,
be
babe.
released. Thank you so much for availing
you, babe.
yourself, right? Thanks. And travel safely. Cool. We will again continue to open up questions to the rest of the floor to ask our panelists. So if you have any questions, by show of hands, please raise your hand and we will note your question. Do you have any questions? We don't have questions. That means that you spoke so well and you covered it all. Okay, there's 1, 2, 3. Okay, that's okay. So we will go on an ad break for like 10 seconds whilst they take a picture. No problem. And we are back from our ad break, right? So there was one hand, there was another hand behind you, okay, and then there was a third hand that side. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, okay?
Okay, my name is Desmond Okon. Earlier when you were speaking, Mokoena, you said that, that the SABC is not a government organization and that you're not funded by the government. But I read somewhere that it was established by the government. And so I want to understand when you made that transition, and I believe that it's also because of its current positioning, that's why you are critical of the government. So when did that transition happen, and what lessons can NTA, Nigerian Television Authority in my country, draw from your organization?
Okay, thank you. You know the history of South Africa, that at some point in time we had a very cruel government called the apartheid government, that the intention was to serve the white minority and blacks were excluded. And therefore all the institutions that you had were geared towards a particular cause. So the public broadcaster, or the SABC at that time, was a state broadcaster, nothing else but a state broadcaster, with the intention to spread propaganda and to counter the information and the fight for democracy. And that is why even people who were being employed before 1994 at the SABC at that time were a particular people. They were headhunted, even some of black people who came. And therefore, towards 1994, when the black people were negotiating with the white minority government, and that led to what we call CODESA, where South Africans engaged in a dialogue and came up with a way forward that led to the elections in 1994. One institution that had to transform was the state broadcaster to be a public. It must serve a public, not the government, because previously it used to serve the government. There was a nick. It does serve the public, whether you talk international issues, local issues, national issues, global issues. It has to be in the interest of the South African public. So that's the difference. Now, even the funding, 90% of resources we generate from, private initiatives like your adverts, partnership, and all of that. Government, which is not government, the South African taxpayers, they do contribute to the fiscus, we know, with tax, and government will give SABC a small portion, So that is why it is called a public broadcaster. It's good because then it has given the institution a leeway to be independent and impartial. It is always about the public. So that's the difference. Now, in other countries, fortunately, I've traveled to more than, I think, 40 countries on the continent. When I include international, it's more than 70 countries that I've been to. On the continent, it's state broadcasters, 100% funded by state, and you work with the state. Even when the president is traveling, he does give you a lift. So there's strong influence of government. In South Africa, that's not the case. That's why when I was leaving work, there was a dinner somewhere, and the international relations minister, who's a foreign affairs in many countries, said one thing when he traveled. He said, "But why is she feisty?" He says, "No, that's our public broadcaster is not a state broadcaster, so they do ask hard questions." So that's the difference. But if you Google, you will see how SABC is structured. It has an independent board. It has got the executive, different departments. News in particular is very, very protected in terms of influence. It does happen at times. There were turbulent times. That is why she came up with that organization when we were regressing. We were almost returning to what was happening pre-1994 because, it depends who are the politicians. Thanks.
Okay, good day. My name is Zainab Adam from SMK Radio in Borno State, Nigeria. So my question is a bit up to history around the world might be here. So what will happen to media organizations that cannot fund themselves? Probably they might end up being embedded or funded by their government. How can they ensure objectivity? Because it's often difficult to disseminate the information, like identifying your role in disseminating the information and then playing the other parts, like the last speaker just said. So how will they ensure that objectivity in this reportage?
I think as I pointed out, with broadcasters that are funded by state, it is going to be very difficult. It's difficult, it happens all the time. And that is why she is saying that much as the people who were traveling with President Tinubu knew that this is an old thing, nobody raised it because it was going to be problematic. So it will be problematic. But with us as ABC, we do ask hard questions. We don't have a problem. For example, right now we've been on government's case. How much are you going to spend? Why are you only working on roads and transport now? But secondly, the issue of the US, we've been asking them, the president of the US is not coming. And then, you know, so I'm saying we've been asking hard questions. So I think that's the role of the media, to ask hard questions. You can still be sensitive to certain things, as Juanita has pointed out, that when we were at The Hague, we were there to report about South Africa's case and Israel. And I was acting international news editor. I was at The Hague. And I said to the team in Joburg, you take the entire South African presentation. Tomorrow you take the entire Israel presentation, so that the world and whoever has access to us can make his or her informed decision, hearing both sides. And even my packages were like that, my crossings were like that. But at the same time, I had to answer lots of questions and ask hard questions about what Israel is doing in Gaza, because the reality is ordinary people are dying. You know, you can't ignore that. So you just have to maintain your journalistic ethics and what you've learned in terms of what journalism is all about. So you have to just do your job, just do your job.
To add to what Madam Sophie says, you will have to represent all sides of the story. And as, what's her name now? Juanita, she said it's better to apologize than to have to ask for permission. So you do it, you represent all sides, and if they have to, you know, put you on the spot about it, then you just apologize and you move on, and then you do it again.
Can I come in before you speak? Kate, it's fine. A campus tour that has to take place, and it's already in the afternoon, so they're taking from our time. It's okay, men are like that. It's fine. So you can go ahead.
So just one of the things which I think is really important is just this going back to the sense of like cohesion journalism. And what I thought was very interesting about what Konita was saying was this whole thing, and my colleagues here, that what you're trying to do when you're a journalist is you're trying to make sure that the community, you're building the community from the bottom up. You're not trying to do cohesion by making it all fine and the people in power, letting them get away with things that they're doing which is not okay. That's not what you're trying to do. What you're trying to do is you're trying to take a real diversity of ideas and people, often very unhappy, very divisive. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to show all of those different ideas, surface views that are often unpopular, which you can't see, and putting it forward there, but in a way which is not breaking things down. And I think that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to build cohesion through surfacing that truth. If that makes sense. I hope that's helpful.
Awesome. There was a hand. That's one, right? The person with the mic, my darling. Please note the hands, right? So that's one, and there's two, and answered. Awesome. So there's two more hands. So if you can just ask your question, and you can go to you as well, then we'll just answer them at the end. Thanks.
Hello, my name is Blessings Musugu, broadcast journalist, News Central Nigeria. So my question is directed at Ms. Amarachi, and it's kind of in direct contrast to what Madam Sophie has said about asking tough questions. It's the 21st century, and we're not going to pretend like we still don't have the challenge of press freedom or the lack of it. We're not going to pretend like we still don't have the challenge of asking questions to policymakers and them outrightly shutting you up.
there are countries, I think every country, basically, especially on the African continent, and Nigeria is a case study, but yes, every country has their own tailored challenges. So my question is, when you're stuck between speculations, because again, as journalists, we owe the people the truth. If there's anybody we owe, is the people, right? But when you're stuck between the speculations from the people and the lack of access to information, like Amarachi has mentioned, from the policymakers, how then do we consolidate when we're asked the difficult questions? When we are asked the difficult questions, how do we answer them? When we ask them the difficult questions and they don't answer us?
Okay.
Before you answer, Marachi, sorry about that. Let's just go to the last question and then we'll wrap it up.
Okay, you want me to stand up or I can sit? Okay, my question will be directed to three of you, Mrs. Sophia, Amarachi, and then Kate. I'm someone who loves conversations a lot, but I want to see you people giving us the action plan so that we don't have to have this kind of conversation again next year. What sort of action plan, what sort of solutions do we prefer to some of these challenges that have been raised here? That's just what I'm interested in. Thank you.
Okay, so the room was really listening. Everyone was really listening. We had the toughest question from a man. But I think that Blessing's question is also very, very important. So I have been in situations where people have asked me a question, the public has asked me a question, and I've had no access to the people who should have the answers. I think the closest example I can give is, I think I remember there was a time when, okay, I think during COVID, I think, many Nigerians were stuck in several countries across the world. Some countries already hired airplanes, air transports to evacuate their citizens. Nigerians were still stuck. Some people got the chance to leave, but it was not the Nigerian government that facilitated their exits, their evacuations. It was the countries that succeeded in getting Nigerians back. For example, the UAE brought Nigerians back, not because they were, it was a goodwill, towards Nigeria, but it was more like because they had been having problems with Nigerians in the UAE and they wanted to get people back. So it was more like a deportation. So I've had instances where people have asked me, okay, so what if we couldn't, how do we get access to the government, and all of that. One thing I've always done is to tell from my own side of the story. There's something our editor-in-chief always tells us. If you're trying to get access to someone in government and get, their own take on the story, and they're refusing to give their own take on the story, despite the Freedom of Information Act that is already in force, and they cannot and are refusing to go on air and say it. Tell your own side of the story, take the people's side of the story, and then go on air and say, you have reached out to so government, to the Minister of Information, you've reached out to the Minister of Agriculture, you've reached out to the Minister of whoever it is, and we have gotten no response. Very soon you will get a response. You will. Whether you will have that particular minister responding to another media, or the person will call your editor-in-chief and will say, what is your girl talking about, that they have reached out to us, that they have not said anything? We have been talking, and say, okay, fine, come on the show and talk about it, because we have asked the questions and you have given us no response. I will leave Madam Sophie to kick us off with the next.
Or the next question, you must have networks to share information. You must attend such gatherings where you can empower yourself, where you can get other people sharing their experiences. I think since this morning, I arrived in the morning, I learned so much during that first panel, particularly with the gentleman from Zambia. I learned a lot. So this afternoon, again, I've learned so much. I mean, when she was talking about the issue of the visa, that it was there, and I said, ish, I also failed as the international editor to point at that. And therefore, I've learned a lot in terms of dig more, don't just report about pomp and ceremony. Look at those agreements, whether they make sense. Previous one where they implemented. So that's how you can grow in terms of being able to interact with others. For example, I belong to an association of African journalists on the continent. Our head office is in Kenya. Lots of people we have different regions, and we have WhatsApp groups for different regions and the continental one. The continental one includes African journalists who are reporting about Africa, outside Africa, in the diaspora. Those people in the US, at the White House, you see them. There's a gentleman there who always asks hard questions. So it's about that. We learn from each other. I mean, I didn't do journalism. I learned, and now I understand, but I've also accumulated experience, 31 years. I was a teacher. Fortunately, when you were doing teaching, you do communications as well. So I learn every day. I continue to learn. I was telling them that I want to come and study now that I'm not full-time anymore here at UJ. So learning, it's, yeah, you don't stop learning.
I think the question is, what have you learned from being here? What are you taking back? What is the one thing that has made the most impression on you? When you can figure that out, run with it.
Sure, that's super powerful. That's really powerful. So the thing that I want to leave everybody with is a sense of, it's just something that I've learned, and I don't know if this will resonate with everybody, but my sense is that what you're wanting to do is to look at where you live and to think around the kinds of journalism that could exist right where you live, the kinds of stories around the actual neighborhoods in which you exist. So you might be a journalist for like a huge national publication or an international publication or whatever, but I think what we're needing to look at simultaneously is the local media that we can build and must build. And I think that what we're also wanting to look at is the integrity of that. And that idea, which I just kind of came home particularly to me, was this whole idea around you never get to the point where you are just trusted. Every single day you build that trust with your audiences. And that integrity you build every single day. And I think if you do that, journalism has got a very bright and very beautiful future. Thanks.
I like the question of what have you learned, right? So instead of us here providing the solutions, because we're all listening, right? And so as we should all provide the solutions in terms of what are the action plans moving forward. So from the talks that we heard this afternoon, I know, and I'd like to believe that all of us now have ideas of when we go back, what are we going to implement in our corners where we come from. So one thing that, or the main thing between this afternoon session and then also the one in the morning, is that we are in agreement that media diplomacy in Africa is a critical juncture, right? The trend is decisively moving towards digital, mobile, and social media, offering immense opportunities for African nations to control their narrative, promote economic growth, and engage with the world in our own terms. However, these opportunities are severely constrained by the challenges, including persistent digital inequality and inaccessible foreign disinformation campaigns, especially against the African continent. The future of effective media diplomacy in Africa will depend on the ability of states to invest in digital infrastructure, protect press freedom, develop professional capacity, and craft authentic, compelling narratives that resonate both at home and abroad. So that is what I have learned from this session. And with that being said, thank you for being an awesome audience. I will now hand back to Dr. Sonja.
Ladies and gentlemen, now that marks the end of the second panel of today. Panel titled Media Diplomacy in Africa, Trends, Opportunities and Challenges. I suppose the biggest challenge for us as we leave today is what have you learned, and from what you have learned, what will you do? So thank you so much to the incredibly amazing, right? And of course, thank you so much as well to the amazing chair, Dr. Maud Blose. Thank you. So, from here on, we have organized a tour of the campus for the MIP fellows as requested. So we will be now moving to our main campus for the campus tour. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for all your collaboration today and your cooperation from the first panel in the morning through to the second panel in the afternoon. Even after we had had a filling lunch, you still remained focused and participated in the discussion. Now that is something to be to consider amazing. So please give yourselves a big round of applause. Tomorrow, we have got another jam-packed program, which starts at 9 a.m. We'll open with our annual public lecture, with, of course, or delivered by the admirable professor, dubbed the professor we admire. This is Professor Admire Mare, who is the head of the Department of Communication and Media. So we look forward to that public lecture, as we always do. I'm excited to hear what you'll be talking to us about. And of course, another edition which is unique from tomorrow. We've got the panel, panel number 3, which looks at diplomacy in a digital media context. This panel will be chaired by Dr. Elvis Madondo, who is here with us today. And the speakers in that panel is Professor Mandla Khatebe from the University of Johannesburg, and Mr. Temilani Mpagati, who is a chairperson, a board member of the Media Diversity and Development Agency. So please make sure tomorrow you join us, and we will not end there. We have another exciting panel discussion. This is panel number 4, which is very unique, something that we have not had in the past 2 years. Now, this is a panel that is convened by the Media Innovation Programme fellows themselves. Now, I am particularly looking forward to this because these are media professionals, people who are in the media practitioners. So I really look forward to hearing what they will be saying to us under, of course, the theme of headlines and handshakes, the role of media in South Africa and Nigeria diplomacy. Ladies and gentlemen, this marks day 1 of the 2025 MTN Media Innovation Summit. Thank you so much. Have yourselves a blessed evening.